around domestic assault and safeguarding issues. We are one of the boroughs who are leading in different means or different outcomes, not just necessarily taking people to court, but looking at other means for us to have a decent resolution. Domestic violence prevention orders, etc. One of the higher boroughs across London. Clears law disclosure, and that's not just the police, that's the partners as well, making sure that we can keep many people safe. The Met Police has been reviewed by Her Majesty Inspector of Constabularies, and we have been brought out as one of the better boroughs for making sure that we have a decent amount of resource put into our safeguarding area of business, which is something I prioritised when I arrived at the borough. So we are looked at favourably in that we're looking at dealing with vulnerable victims, making sure we're dealing with missing persons and all the things that are linked to knife crime and gangs, etc. in that area of business as well. Moped-enabled crime. Now, again, everyone is well aware of that. For the south area, or south of the river, it is ourselves, Lambeth and Croydon, who are the volume players for moped-enabled or two-wheeled enabled crime. We are by no means in the same league as Westminster, Camden, Islington, Hackney and those boroughs in the north, in that they are considerably higher than us in the volumes. Now, looking at the numbers and how we've dealt with that here, again, a lot of that is to do with partnership work. There are a lot of anchor points. We've sprayed a lot of signs and put things on mopeds, and we're trying to educate people that it is worthwhile protecting their moped. The research generally indicates that people look at a moped less favourably, and it's easier to replace than a car for obvious reasons, but they are more or less inclined to secure it quite as strongly as perhaps they could do. As a borough, we don't see a great deal of people coming from other boroughs, apart from those ones I've mentioned in North London. But again, you have to bear in mind that as a borough, we have a large front door, I suppose is the easiest way of putting it, from North London, with a number of bridges, etc. When you compare us to Lambeth, with our limited access straight into the borough, we have a fairly large north boundary where we have a number of bridges, etc. that can come in from those key boroughs north. There are some trends where mopeds have been stolen elsewhere in London and used in crime, but there is a larger trend where they have been stolen on this borough. We do recover a considerable amount, and we're putting a lot of work into that. The organisation as a whole is putting a great deal of work in with some of the moped companies, much like we did with Apple on mobile phones, to make them more difficult to steal. When you look at the steering locks, for example, they're relatively easy to break, and some of the footage, people can steal mopeds within minutes, and they use other motorbikes to push them away, etc. So we're educating people who use those mopeds, trying to capture that market of people who commute in, to make sure that they're aware that it is something worth securing and something worth keeping safe, because the knock-on effects of that mean that obviously it's used in crime and they lose it. But as I say, we do recover a considerable amount, and we have arrested a number of people over the months, but as we go forward, they do obviously come out of prison and start again. But we do have a number of operations and covert tactics that we have in place. Clearly I'm not going to explain it here and now, but please be assured that I have got a number of operations running as we speak to try and tackle that, and much of that is to try and stimulate a level of intelligence to give us different things to look at, like where the handling market is, where stolen goods go to, where mopeds go to, and so forth. So we will be looking at that as a preventative measure, trying to get further upstream with that intelligence flow as well. So that covers off just the basic trends where we are in those key crime types. I'll move on to what the Met may look like in the future, and what Southwark Borough and Borough Police will look like probably in the future. Hopefully you'll be aware of the two Pathfinder sites. There's one in East London covering Redbridge, Dagenham and Havering, and the central north is Camden and Islington, which have been joined together. So those Pathfinder sites have been in place for about 6 months now, 5-6 months. There has been a great deal of consultation with MOPAC. They have been reviewed on a daily basis, and I think some of the information that's come out of that, if you've been informed about it, is that they deemed the East Cluster to be underperforming around those INS calls, so our emergency response about getting to calls on time. Some measures have been put in place to rectify that, and I can happily report that those two Pathfinder sites are slightly below the Met average. So in essence, they've been put together and they are now achieving there or thereabouts with the rest of the Met. So they are by no means the worst, but they're clearly not the best. For the purposes of what we're doing at Southwark Borough, we are one of the best. I think we are day in, day out, more and off the best in the south area for emergency response. So we get to 90% plus of our emergency calls on time. That includes domestic assault, burglary and all the other crime types, so we're doing extremely well. And that's taken some hard yards around making sure we have the right people in the right place with the right skills and so forth. So a lot of restructuring has been going on in the last 12 months to make sure we have the right skilled people in the right places to deal with those crime types. So that's very much, as I mentioned, what we're trying to do with the robbery, to make sure we have a decent amount of resource behind that for a bespoke crime type which affects gang crime, knife crime and so forth. So the proposal is, I think, that the Mayor will be spoken to, or MOPAC will be spoken to at the tail end of this year to give a presentation around those two Pathfinder sites with a recommendation that the 12 super borough model goes forward. Now, under that model, we will merge with Lambeth. I'm not hearing anything to indicate that that won't happen in the slightest. My strong indication it will happen is when, not if. The timescales are fairly fluid. I would expect us to be merging with Lambeth probably in the early part of 2018, so in the first quarter, I would suggest, 2018. Within that, we held a consultation exercise around public access last month, where we spoke about station offices and front counters being closed in order that we can move forward and find the £50 million worth of savings from police estate that is expected of us to ensure that we can meet our savings targets. The findings will be announced, I think, by MOPAC this week. The proposal for this borough is that we will maintain the 24/7 front counter services at Walworth Police Station, which would suggest that Peckham and Southwark Police Stations' front counters will close. But that does not mean that either of those police stations will close. Both of those police stations will remain open. When you're looking at the smaller police stations, Rotherhithe is effectively gone, and Camberwell will probably go in the future as well. So the three larger sites will remain open, but the only 24/7 counter will be at Walworth if those proposals go forward. As and when that is determined, I will obviously put that out amongst the partnership and then put it wider across the local community so they fully understand what that means. The suggestion around that is the Met Police is moving far more in the direction of IT, so there's a lot of money being spent on making sure police officers have their body-worn videos, which hopefully you will have seen on those patrolling. We were one of the last boroughs to get that. It's been very, very good. I've seen a number of arrests and a number of bits of evidence linked to those arrests, which, had we not had those body-worn videos, it would have been far more difficult to arrest or convince a judge and jury of the offence. I think it's fantastic. The officers have really warmed to it and are using it very, very well. It's very impactful in that officers can turn up to a domestic assault scene, for example, and they can capture, as they go through the front door, seeing blood and the victim, the emotional state the victim's in, etc., which cannot be translated in the written word, and probably less so when they're in the box at court. So that sort of evidence is absolute gold dust as far as I'm concerned, and I've promoted it to the highest level with my teams. They are more than content. They are using it far more and more and more. They will be using it as expected with stop and search and all the other things to make sure that our performance is more than transparent. Moving forward with that, the organisation will be providing frontline officers with tablets so they don't have to keep coming back into the police station. The current setup is the uniform officers all parade out at Peckham Police Station, and when they have to put a report on, they will have to come back to Peckham. So if they're down in Crystal Palace or up at Bermondsey or up at London Bridge, they will have to go back to Peckham or one of their police stations in order to type up their reports and their investigations. With the new strategy around IT, that will no longer be the case. They can stay out far more, which enables us to be far more obvious to people, and we can deal with their needs and their requirements far quicker. Also with that, the Met Police has launched a new internet site, and within that it's far easier for people to report crime, get advice, get straight into some of our other telephone services. There are now telephone reporting services which people can report crime on, and also that this will allow us to be far more in the community as we should be, rather than keep coming back and waiting for our fairly antiquated IT systems. Just to put that into context, we've just been upgraded to Windows 8.1. So if anyone's got Windows, you'll know where I'm going with that. So that is the general direction the Met Police is going in. I think this stuff around the tablets will be fantastic because it will allow cops to stay out and about rather than keep coming back. It will allow them to patrol far longer. It will give them and the victim the capability to do an investigation there and then rather than have to do it in bite-sized chunks. But in order to get there, that has meant that we will have to look at the police estate to find those savings in order that we can become a police service of the 21st, 22nd century rather than relying on Windows 8.1, which I heard the groans in the background there. And it is pantomime season. But that is the general direction the Met is going in. So I would expect us to be merging with Lambeth in the early part of 2018 unless something major happens. If I'm brutally honest with you, I think there's some really good opportunities there. As the two boroughs that they are, because of the complexity and the volume of crime and just how generally busy they are, I'm blessed to have police officers who are very positive, who are very can-do. They will make things work, they will overcome barriers, and Lambeth is exactly the same. I am the nominated BCU commander. So Mr. Wood, who's the current Chief Superintendent for Lambeth, has been selected and will be taking over the homicide command. I will take over Lambeth and Southwark as and when it happens. And I think there's some real opportunities for us to make some decent differences around gang crime, knife crime, because we will have the capability to look at those cross-border issues. A good example being around the Brandon estate. There are some issues between the two boroughs, and it will allow us to make sure that we have an inflated level of resource to a certain extent, but it will enable us to concentrate far better as a partnership or as a single entity rather than two boroughs doing it together. So in essence, that's where we are.
Thanks very much, Simon. There's a lot there, so I'm gonna look round. I'm gonna go round, starting over here with Evelyn, and see what topics you'd like to get onto, and we're going to take questions in topics. So anything from what we've heard or anything else you've got, but
I think my interest was knife crimes.
Knife crime. Okay, Michael.
It will be general safety around the bonfire nights and Halloween nights.
Ben? Oh, sorry, Rosie. So Rosie got here late, so I've forgotten her already, and I'm very sorry about that. So, Rosie.
I'm going to ask a bit more about resourcing and kind of the challenges that you see about the merger with Lambeth.
Mine was the same topic as Rosie, hopefully not the same question though. I've got a list. So the merger with Lambeth would be good. It'd be helpful to pick up something on moped crime. And I have a question around London Bridge.
Anne?
No, I'm okay, thank you.
Chris?
Yeah, I mean, my concern, as always, is about the use of IT and how that actually relates to people out there and how they know what they have to do now to,
Yeah.
you know,
Sure.
it's always my concern, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Mine too. We will definitely talk about it. So we've got a list of topics here that we're going to go through. We seem to have a large number of people in the room tonight. Has anyone come to ask questions from the police this evening? Because I'd just like to get an indication of how many. So
I've got a question with the police and also with the fire commander.
Okay, so we've got 1, 2 questions from the floor.
Just one general one with the police, that's all.
Third, so that's 3 questions from the floor, so we'll get to you later on. I'm going to ask questions up here first, and then we'll finish with the questions from the floor. So let's kick off with resourcing, because I think there's quite a lot there, and I also think there's quite a lot of people that want to ask. Then we'll get on to knife crime, then bonfire night safety. I've got some questions around fireworks to add to that, so then moped crime, and then the incident on London Bridge, and then we'll finish with the IT issues as well. So on resourcing, I'm going to start with Rosie.
Thank you. Yeah, I suppose it's quite a general one really, but I wondered if you can say something about how resource pressures are impacting your ability to kind of work as effectively as possible. Obviously, I appreciate what you were saying about introductions of IT and things, and you may be able to make some things more efficient. But nonetheless, like the loss of all those front counter services and those 24-hour services must be concerning you. And I suppose then, sort of linked to that, I wondered if you can say anything about whether Lambeth are experiencing a similar amount of closures in terms of stations and front counter services, and what you see as the kind of the key challenges then in bringing the two boroughs together. I know you said there are a lot of opportunities potentially, but if you could say a bit more about what challenges you foresee as well.
Okay. I'll try and remember all that. Stand by.
So.
Resources-wise, well, I'm not going to lie. You can always do with more. I've yet to meet probably a fire commander or a police officer who wouldn't ask for more staff. I think you probably have the same wherever you go, if I'm brutally honest. But I'm a realist at the end of the day, and if the money's not there, it's not there. If I'm brutally honest with you. As an organisation, as a borough, yes, we do have vacancy factors. We're not, bespoke in that. I think all boroughs, all departments will have vacancy factors, and I think the issue is as an organisation, it's getting used to dealing with those. In that, if you delete those vacancy factors, you get on with what you've got, and that would be what the future looks like. I think I haven't been in this book, but if you're looking at what the Met will probably look like, I've just literally before I left the office, I noted there was an article on our internal intranet from the Deputy Commissioner talking about what the Met will probably look like by 2020 or 2021, and it will be something like 27,000 as opposed to the 32 that we used to have. I think we're down to about 31, 30 now. and I think probably over the next 12, 18 months we'll probably go down to something like 27, 28, and that is just a fact of life. With the larger restructuring review of the Met and what we're looking at, just the borough mergers is just one of a number of strands that we're looking at. The IT strategy is another, and we're just trying to make sure that the organisation is efficient, effective, and as modern as possibly can be to deal with those issues. So there's an awful lot going on at one particular time in order that we can meet those budgetary measures that we need to meet in the next 18 months or so. So for the purposes of immediately within Southwark, yes, we have some vacancies, but we've always had those vacancies. I think we've got over the last 18 months, 2 years before I got here, it was in that direction anyway. Talking about restructuring of staff, as I mentioned, around knife crime and robbery, I think it's only pertinent, and even if I had sufficient, you'd have to be fairly agile around what you do and where you put your resources. So we already work very closely with the partnership. We have we look at. I have an internal tasking meeting where I look at where I put the staff. There is a partnership tasking meeting that does the same thing for the whole partnership and where the council wardens, etc. will go, and that works very, very nicely. They look at different crime types and different sort of things around antisocial behaviour, so it's just making sure that we have that balance right as well. But I think it's looking at what I'm trying to do around the robbery, I think it's the grown-up approach. Hopefully people see me as a grown-up, most of the time anyway. But looking at things around that, because we have that issue, when you look at, when we break down, as I mentioned, 60% of our robbery is knife related, then it's an easy win, and I need to make sure that I have resources in the right place. That may mean we will have to look at some of those issues around safeguarding, for example, because I only have finite resources, but it's making those decisions about where I'm going to have those staff, who they're going to work to, and what initiatives they're going to be working to. So I think even if I had a plethora of staff, you would still have to make those decisions along the way. Issues around the front offices, looking at Lambeth to start with, looking at the estate as I know it for Lambeth Borough, Brixton Police Station had an overhaul a few years back and a lot of money was ploughed into that, so they've got a new custody suite in the back, they've revamped the internal. Kennington Police Station will be going, I think there's one in Cavendish Road, I think, which will probably go as well, but the vast majority of staff for Lambeth are already in Brixton Police Station, so there isn't a massive change for them, and their 24/7 counter is at Brixton. So when you're comparing the two, their estate is far better than ours in that they have everybody in the same place, which works far better. We, by virtue of the fact of the buildings we have and the capacity we have to split ours between two. Now, when I first arrived, we had 3, and that I and some of the other units worked out at Southwark Police Station. I took the decision to make sure I was co-located with the vast majority of my staff at Peckham, which I think is far better. So in essence, that Southwark Police Station is used by specialist units rather than local ones, which I think is fine. So we work from 2 sites. The uniform and the neighbourhoods will be in the Peckham Police Station with most of the SLT. The investigation and the CID work out of Walworth with the custody suite, which makes sense. So moving forward, again, the issues around the station office closures, Walworth has always been the 24/7 counter. The decisions and the recommendations have been made on footfall through those front counters. So Walworth has always been the busiest front counter. Peckham is, behind it. Southwark is further behind it. And when you look at the level of people coming through reporting crime, it is fairly minimal. I mean, looking at Southwark, for example, a lot of people come into the front counter at Southwark to ask for directions and other things, which I understand is important. But the hope is that police officers will be far more visible and out there and can answer those issues along the way. So those decisions have been made on the needs of people within the station office, and you have to bear in mind that with the 3 station offices we have, if we condense that down to 1, that gives us the opportunity to condense those station officer reception staff, who are police staff rather than police officers. More often than not, if they're not available, a police officer will go in there, which will limit how we can deal with crime and respond to things, because we've already taken 1 off the street, if you see. So condensing it down to 1 will already give us about 4 PCs extra, in essence, per day. So when you look at the numbers and the resources, it makes basic sense for those things to happen. The issues around the EIT, I totally agree. I've spoken about this a number of times with a number of people across the borough, not just so there are issues around people have perceptions around some of the elder generations not having computers or being IT literate. A lot of research went into that by the central team on the Met, and they found that the high, I think it was in the 90s percentage, I'll have to dig out the numbers, but I think it's around the 90%, were far more inclined to use the internet for reporting things and finding out. Again, it's not just reporting crime, there's a number of things that you can do on the new internet site to direct you in the right direction to find what you want, rather than going to a police station, like collision accidents and things like that. You can get all that done through the website. I think there's something was raised in the consultation, which I totally agree with, around the IT. I think there's a big job for us locally, and more so for the Mets to do, around communicating these changes and these opportunities for people to use different means and methods to get into the police. And I think that is a big job that they will have to do. We have a department that deals with communications and media and comms and stuff like that. They will have a big lead on that. But locally, me, my SLT and the officers out on the street will have a big issue, especially around the neighbourhoods, etc., around how people can speak to the neighbourhood officer. And within that structure, they're looking at neighbourhood hubs around where our dedicated ward officers can keep their kit. And I think the promises are that they need to be within 20 minutes of patrol time of their beat or their ward, etc. So geographically, we need to have a look at that. And again, when they're looking at the sort of the number crunching around where those front office counters would be, has been dealt with. Looked at. There's nothing on this borough that's not deemed to be within 45 minutes of public transport access. And again, you're looking at your neighbouring boroughs. Lewisham has a front counter at Lewisham, Brixton for Lambeth, Croydon, and then you obviously have the City of London and elsewhere. So we are relatively blessed in this borough for public transport. Probably less so as the further south you go. But that is what all this consultation has been based upon. So I think there is some opportunity around that. Moving forward around Lambeth and Southwark merging, I think a lot of the barriers, if I'm brutally honest, will probably be internal rather than external. In that police officers like boundaries, invisible as they are. They don't like crossing over to different boroughs. They like the number on their shoulder and the letters that indicate they're from Southwark. There is a great deal of pride, a great deal of ownership of where they work, which I think is good and proper, and that's probably the same for the fire service. And I would imagine there will be elements of friendly rivalry. I mean, when I joined the police 20 years ago, the Met looked massively different. Westminster, for example, was 5 different commands. And there was a level of, competitiveness between where I worked at West End Central, which was Soho and Mayfair, and the neighbouring one, which is Charing Cross, which was Leicester Square and so forth. So we used to take the mickey out of them and vice versa. So I would imagine there will be a good example is I still have a PC who works at Southwark Borough who still has MM on his shoulders, which indicates Peckham. Now Peckham and Woolworth have been joined for a long time. So you have that level of, sense of belonging, I suppose. So I think some of those issues will be internal. But the way around that and the way I would deal with that, we've already started change meetings. We already have leads for certain strands. We already have those communications internally to deal with those issues. And I suppose externally, I don't think a massive amount will change. Yes, the things on the shoulders will change. But the external picture about what people will see is with the IT strategy and the other things that are coming, you should see more, or they will be more available to the general public because they won't have to keep coming back and forth. And looking at that, and again, Southwark and Lambeth is by no means the largest geographic merger. So geographically speaking, it's relatively small because it's not a massive, I think we're 11 or 13 square miles as a borough. Lambeth will be fairly similar. So we're not looking at, when you look at another one, for example, Bromley, Croydon and Sutton are suggested to merge. Now, if you're thinking about those 3 boroughs geographically, if you had something in Biggin Hill and had to get to Sutton, could take months, days, years. I mean, I might like the situation, but you get the point I'm making. In that our 2 boroughs, although, when we have a bad day as Southwark or Lambeth have a bad day around a particular crime type, the Met has a bad day because we are, and always will be, a volume player. We will be in the top 5, if not top 3, for everything because of the nature of where we are. And that's the same as Lambeth, it's the same as Westminster, the same as, Tower Hamlets. It's the same as many of those, rich inner London boroughs. As in, rich by diversity and, volumes of people and the people coming through who work here and so forth. So we're always going to be there or thereabouts. So Southwark and Lambeth are one of the big ones, but geographically speaking, we're fairly small. So, making the changes for the merger, my plan, as it stands at the present time, until I get told, yes, it's definitely happening, and when it's happening, will be to keep it very, very simple. Because if you make it complicated, it makes it hard work, if I'm brutally honest. So the issues around where people patrol out of, there isn't a police station on those 2 boroughs that can fit over 1,000 people into to do a day job. So they will have to be split amongst a number of sites, if not 2 or 3. So it's working out what needs to be where, what needs to be co-located with, the senior leadership near the custody suite. From what I've seen, they're proposing that Brixton and Walworth will stay, so there will be 2 custody suites. That gives us opportunities to put investigators at different sites, so that could be proactive and reactive and protecting vulnerable people. I had a meeting with Lambeth again today to explain how we have dealt with things to upskill our uniform officers so they can take an investigation in the future, and they're going to mirror what we're doing. So we're really moving towards how we're dealing with things in a more close way. And I had another point which I've totally forgotten now. But in essence, I think there are some opportunities, and I think the limitations will be of our own making. if I'm honest. But if we can crack that by making sure that the workforce, inverted commas, and colleagues are included in that decision-making process, that should be fairly simple. And there's lots of good, organisational learning from the Pathfinder sites to dampen that sort of negativity as well. So I'm fairly glass half full anyway. But I think it'll be good.
So I've got a couple of quick ones, and VJ's got a supplementary as well. Just on the IT, if you use it, is the Met concerned about hacking if they're on 8.1, which is
we have departments, directorates of information intelligence, all that sort of stuff that deal with those issues.
Yeah.
I'm fairly IT illiterate, if I'm brutally honest. I can just about use my iPhone. But I have no immediate concerns around the Met being hacked, if I'm honest, because we spend a lot of time and probably a lot of money with the assistance of the government to make sure that we don't, because of what we have.
Of course. And when we talk about reporting crime there, I know quite a lot of people in my ward their first thought would be to call the Safer Neighbourhood team. Yeah. And will that remain an option for them, just to pick up the phone?
Well, for the purposes of us, they will have mobile phones. We already have in place the promise that the Met has given around 2 dedicated ward officers and sergeants, so we have already adhered to that. I spoke to a councillor the other day and they questioned when we go from 21 wards to 24, I think it is, then we'll just have to find more DWOs to maintain that promise. I don't think that's going to be a massive issue. And so we are already there. So I'm fairly content. I mean, the biggest issue for us for the future, and again for the community, is finding those hubs. And again, it's not. Please don't think that these hubs are front counters or what Safer Neighbourhood bases used to be. It literally is somewhere for them to securely keep their kit, so that they don't have to come to Peckham and then walk all the way down to Crystal Palace, for example. So they need to be. The promise is that we will need to find places that they are 20 minutes patrol time from their ward, and it literally is just finding them space to keep their kit securely, so that cuffs, baton, CS spray, and so forth are maintained in an appropriate environment safely, so that they don't have to keep coming all the way back to the mothership.
Does the guidance on wards, does that look at size of wards? Because the change in Southwark will see some 2-member wards, which means they're actually smaller than 3-member wards. So would the same apply to those 2-member wards as the 3-member wards?
I think there will be an opportunity in the future. I mean, my theory around it is neighbourhoods as a brand is very good, very strong, and the communities like it a lot. 2 DWIs is good, but if I can find ways to make sure that there is a larger element around neighbourhoods, I think that's an opportunity, because that gives us the opportunity to do problem solving and that better community relations. If you get rid of neighbourhoods and put everybody onto response teams, that limits that opportunity. So I think it's something for us to look at in the merger. But the general promise is, I think, looking to the future, there may be some opportunities, there may be some flexibility, but the promise is 2 DWIs per ward, which will remain. And there may be some opportunity for the larger ones to maybe have more, but that will have to be something we will look at in the future.
Sorry, what's the DWI?
Dedicated ward officer. That's sort of, in old money, it's a home group.
VJ, supplementary?
Yes, so I just quickly wanted to. Sorry. I just wanted to quickly go back to the subject of the merger with Lambeth.
Yep.
So you've talked a lot about savings coming from real estate. I'm slightly dubious as to whether it's all about real estate. I mean, will there be, for example, a reduction in civilian support staff in either or both boroughs?
If I'm brutally honest, there isn't many support staff left,
right,
because this is the second round of savings we've had to find. We've already had to find 600 million. So a lot of things like HR, finance, occupational health, etc. have been commissioned out.
In which case, does that mean a reduction in warranted officers then?
But as I said, the numbers will look smaller.
Right.
I don't think there's any way around that. I don't think there's any way around that at all. As I said, that Deputy Commissioner's article that I read on the way out, it clearly indicates that we are shifting. We've already come down from 32,000. And he's been fairly upfront, as the previous Commissioner and the current Commissioner have been fairly upfront, saying, that golden ticket of 32,000 cops is unsustainable with the funding that we have. So it will start to shrink. Not through people being here, but it will be natural wastage. So people aren't going to get kicked out.
Ben.
Thank you for a really detailed report. On the merger still, you've talked in some detail about our priorities for Southwark, so knife crime, robbery, moped and phone theft. I just wonder if those are exactly the same as the priorities in Lambeth, whether there's any different priorities and whether that will affect the resourcing going to the
I would suggest that Lambeth will be fairly similar, because we are fairly similar boroughs. I think one that will probably be with my knowledge and experience of Lambeth and looking at some of the data is that they have a firearms issue that we haven't traditionally had. So that will be something I will be telling my mind to around firearms discharges. Now, don't get me wrong, we have sufficient numbers of our own to worry about, let alone, but I mean, the difference between the two boroughs is we are very similar. We are volume, they have a robbery problem as much as we do, and we're looking at the numbers, this afternoon. Robbery, burglary are fairly similar, domestic assault's fairly similar, knife crime is fairly similar, and I think it will fluctuate depending on how you deal with it at any given time. So I don't think there'll be massive differences. Some of it will come down to probably local authorities and what their priorities are and what they deem to be important. And I think that will be the trick for me to understand what both sides of the fence require, what they need. But I don't think there's a massive amount of difference between the two boroughs, if I'm honest.
Main question. Is that supplementary? Yeah, go on.
Yeah, I just wondered, you said you'd be telling people what was happening and the changes. Will you be coming to some of our community councils or send some officers round to update?
For the mergers?
Yes. And
I think it's right and proper that you know.
Yeah, and all the changes so they don't, because I know my ward, I'm a village ward, and they'll get all
I think the issues are, if we just crack on like the Met Police, and don't speak to the communities, then that's, the community is no different to the police. If I don't talk to people, they will fill that with rumour and supposition. So I think it's only important that we get out and speak to people to make sure that they understand exactly what's going on, because at the end of the day we're here to work with them, so they need to understand what's going on.
And will you bring some literature as well so we can give it out as well, some short?
I will do my very best.
Lovely, thank you.
I'd like to pick up on moped crime, if that's okay. So this is something which is plaguing the borough at the moment. I'm talking about people swinging by on a moped and snatching phones and handbags and things like that. I know it's something Neil Coyle MP has raised in Parliament. My understanding is that part of the problem is that Met Police guidance is that officers can't pursue if the pursuit gets to a certain speed. Is that right? I just wanted to wondered if you could give us a sort of breakdown of what other things you're doing to tackle that crime. I mean, I've had a couple of friends who've been affected by it.
Yeah, I mean, some of the issues are, yes, I think it's, to fall short on the argument about we don't pursue, I think it's on a case-by-case basis, to be honest. I know that the government is looking at legislation around how that can improve the supports around what we're trying to do, and I know that we have some trained officers to deal with a tactical TPAC, which is about how we box people in, and there's a number of tactics that we can use. So it's by no means that we don't pursue or we don't chase after people. But you will be aware of a number of IPCC investigations into police officers. So you can probably understand we're all humans at the end of the day, and this is a job, which is what I tell my staff. This is a job, and the most important thing is that, one, you come back to the nick, and two, you go home and look after your family. This is the most important thing at the end of the day. It sounds harsh, but it's reality. So you can understand that there may be, not Southwark, but there may be some reticence across the country in that, if you're using the example of the one, I think it was in Islington, where the young man was killed, hit by a vehicle that was trying to get out of the way of a police vehicle. You can understand that investigation can take a year, 2 years, and then there will be an internal investigation on the back end of that. So these investigations can take a number of years, which means these officers are, in essence, gated or limited in what they can do for that period of time, which is right and appropriate, to make sure that there is a clear, transparent investigation and that we protect the staff to make sure that nothing else can happen to them in the interim. So there may be on occasions a bit of reticence, but there is nothing to say that we cannot pursue, but it will be done within safe parameters. Issues around that, we are training up a number of staff. We have issues around, I'm trying to think what we call it now, but there is a tagging spray which we've issued out. We haven't used it in this borough, but there have been some uses, I think, in Islington and North London, which they will spray in almost like a DNA spray. It's a bit like the stuff that you sometimes get out of burglar alarms, which will coat them in this particular DNA spray, which will come up. So if we go back and search the address, and lo and behold, one of their items of clothing has the stuff on, then we know, put two and two together and so forth. So we're dealing with issues around that. More bespoke to probably the south-east area of London, we're putting together an investigation team, taking staff from each of the boroughs to create an investigation team or a team to deal with moped-related crime, to look at those link series, because when you look at some of the intelligence and some of the data around this, you will find one or two vehicles have done a number of offences. And it's looking into, because it will be a small number of people, although when you look at it and the proliferation of some of this crime type, it is clearly a method rather than an organisation. And it's quickly learned because, to be honest, it's caught the media attention, because you're looking at people going out to the West End and smashing in doors, windows, etc. It's a relatively easy and simple method for people to pick up and learn, because they've seen it on their telly and they'll use it and they'll take their helmets off. And again, you will see some of the footage where they have masks on and gloves on, so these people are not daft by any stretch of the imagination. So we will deal with all things, and we have stop sticks, like the old, probably if people watch some of those programmes around traffic cops, the stingers. There was a variation for that, for mopeds and motorbikes. We have that. We are training people up to make sure we have all options. As I said, there are other covert operations that we are running in order to try and catch suspects or stimulate intelligence and give us more avenues to look at. So we will use the whole toolbox of options. So I understand where you're coming from, but no, we don't say, no, you don't do that. There is nothing in place to say, do not follow that person or try and arrest that person. But you can probably understand some, resistance on occasions from individuals. But we will do all we can to encourage people, and to say the people that lead on this come from the Road and Transport Command, which is a pan-London command within the Met Police, who work with Transport for London, and they will be looking at that legislative bits, and they will be liaising with the government, and they will be lobbying on behalf of not just London, but the whole country. So we are shifting forward, but again, a lot of it is about education around people. As soon as they get off this train, they put the earphones in and then watch Game of Thrones as they walk to the office.
Yes.
And things like that, which, as a police officer, there's something much I can do. If you can target hard on yourself as much as you target hard on your vehicle or your house and so forth, that will do me a great service. So locking your bike to one of the anchor points that the local authorities put in, putting your phone in your pocket, not advertising the fact that you've got the latest iPhone and everything else would be of great benefit. Because that's a lot of, as you might point out, a lot of the robberies we have are people having their bag or their phone or something else snatched. And the other robberies, which are more traditional ones, in inverted commas, are lesser. So again, it's all about educating people to have two locks, to put a bike cover on it, on all the other sort of things. Like if you leave your light on at home, it's next door that gets done because they haven't, and so forth. So there is a bit of, and again, some of the advertising campaigns around that, making your bike less attractive. So it's just educating those people, which will make a big dent in it, like you did with the iPhones.
Evelyn, we go to knife crime.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Chair. I've lived in Southwark for such a long time. For the longest, I've always had issue with knife crime. It's always been an issue with knife crimes. And some people will say that things have got progressively worse now. Admittedly, yes, knife crime is a London-wide issue, and thankfully we're not on the top spot anymore. But things are still not abating. Two questions I have: why do you think Southwark is so attractive to such crimes? And secondly, what are you doing to kind of reduce the numbers that we currently have?
Okay. I suppose the easiest way to answer that is when I first arrived here about 12 months ago, a lot of people came to meet me, and I came to a lot of meetings and shook their hand, and they asked me what I'm doing about knife crime, which is a fair question. And the response I gave, well, what are you doing about it as well? Because, as I mentioned before, that sounds rather sarcastic, but the issue is, as a police officer and police officers, as the people I work with, there's only so much that we can do around the issue. And the reason I push so hard for the local authority to lead on the knife crime strategy, because if there was a Met Police badge on the front of it, stamp saying this is police-led, there are certain connotations that come along with that, because it's all around in people's minds, stop and search and being arrested. And then that links into the issue I mentioned earlier about the wall of silence and the reluctance of people to come forward and speak to us. So I will play my part, as will the people I work with, in that we have a part to play. We are a spoke in the wheel, a piece of the jigsaw, whatever you want to term it as. But we will never solve knife crime. The short-term fix that we can put in place is stopping and searching more people, which we're already doing. And I suppose one of the things we probably need to look at is around girls carrying knives more, because when you look at some of the stop and search data for this borough, I think we're about the third or fourth in volume for stop and search in the Met. Lambeth is first, Westminster's second, I think we're third, and the new sort of Camden Islington merger is about third or fourth, so we're up there and always have been. And again, the stop and search data proves we're stopping the right people, because we're arresting 1 in 5 every time we stop. So in essence, there is a positive. We found something which they shouldn't have, or they've broken the law in some fashion. The 1 in 5 stop and search. So the short-term fix for us is, stop and search and arresting people. But the longer-term piece is, as you come back to, when I was a detective sergeant here 12 years ago, knife crime was an issue then, and Southwark was always seen as a knife borough, and Lambeth is seen as a knife borough, but has that firearms connotation as well. So there is something not particular about this, but there is something about Southwark where it is, how can I put this? Something about this borough that people find it acceptable to carry a knife. And a lot of these people are youngsters, and the key message I have repeated on a number of occasions is, I will have a perception as a 40-year-old man around what I think is going on. But these people we are trying to deal with are 13, 14, 15, 16, and they won't listen to an individual like me. One, because I wear a police uniform. Two, because I'm old and miserable. And three, things like Snapchat and they're old hat. And the Met Police just about uses Twitter and Facebook. And it's getting into those mediums and finding people with legitimacy to get into those areas of business. Speak to individuals and say, look, why do you feel the need to do this? Now, there will be issues around broken families, there will be issues around they've been exposed to domestic violence, there'll be all sorts of stuff from the research which is spot on. But it's then getting into them saying, what is it you need? And when you speak to some of these individuals, and we spoke about an issue that we found earlier where they've melted down knives that have been seized and made some playgrounds and exercise yards. Now that's perfect, isn't it? Because a lot of the feedback I've got from some of the public meetings I've gone to is they say, well, there's nothing to do here. I've got nothing to do, and idle hands, etc., etc. So that is the key bit for me. The last bit for me in this jigsaw is working out why they feel the need, because we've done things like mediation. And just before I arrived last summer, there was mediation amongst a fairly fluid group of early teenagers who had no immediate affiliation to any gang, and they swapped allegiances very, very quickly. We got them in for mediation because they were, as a small group, the reason that we had a spike in June, July of 2016. But they would go to mediation, but then they come out and they start stabbing each other. So you can lead a horse to water, and all the other phrases that I come out with. But those are the issues, and it's getting into that group of individuals to understand why we're doing it. So the issues that I will promote stop and search, and we put a lot of training into our staff to make sure they do it properly. They have the body-worn video, so they do it properly and it's videoed correctly. So they can say, they make sure the legislation is maintained, they explain why they're doing it, what their power is, who they are, and so forth. So we're putting a lot of work into that. We're putting a lot of work into sort of the diversion stuff, and we'll make sure that I will make sure that the staff are available to have roundtable exercises with youth groups to understand both sides of the argument. And that, having been to a meeting a few months ago, an individual said he had no inclination to speak to the police because he felt hunted, I quote, as a youngster. Now, which I understand that. But then if you asked him to do the job that I asked my staff to do, he might see it from a different perspective, and vice versa. And it's all around, police officers not having the last word, and so forth. And it's just that educational piece, which I'm more than happy to sign up to, and we're trying to promote all the time. I mean, the job I mentioned around the robbery, I think if we get results right around that robbery piece and the staff that we're putting into that will create a great deal of intelligence around some of the knife crime, and we'll start to bring it down. But when you're looking at some of the stats around us, compared to other boroughs, the Met have a load of information around what we term as habitual knife carriers, and we have a matrix around gang laws, and we are, yes, we have gangs, but we're not the most voluminous for gangs. We have a number of habitual knife carriers, but it's not on the same volume as other key boroughs, so we're not quite the same. So there's something different about Southwark, and we need to understand what that is. But the key bit is, why do people find it acceptable to take that knife in the first place in their little man bag in their waistband? And those of you who've been on the Southwark Police website or their Twitter feed will see the knives that we take off the street every single day: hunting knives, kitchen knives, zombie knives, etc. We're taking them off the street on a regular basis through weapon sweeps and arrests and everything else. But that doesn't abate it. So, in answer to your question, what am I doing about it? I will make sure that we play our part in arresting people, stop and search, and all the other things that we can possibly do through diversion. We're doing stuff around football, coaching and other things like that to make sure that there are other avenues for people to go into. We will feed people into mediation. We will speak to their family. And we're doing a lot of work on that. And Helen Lyons, my detective superintendent, is doing some fantastic work around some of the estates and speaking to the mums and dads and having that educational piece saying, do you understand what your son stroke daughter is up to, who they're engaged with and things like that. And we will try and educate that to engage, so that if we can have that. And I sent out a letter with Michael O'Connor, who was the independent chair of the Safeguarding Children's Board, through the schools, saying, look, these are a couple of websites through the Met, please have a look at them and have a discussion with your children around knife crime, or what the connotations and what the ramifications of these things are. So we will try, again, every avenue to make sure that we try and bring this down, because this is the one that plagues me every day and worries me every day. If that answers your question.
Thank you.
Just a follow-up on that. You remember Camberwell Community Council, I think, where the young man said that. There was a question in that room where the young people were asked if they would join the Met and become officers, and I think it was 5 out of 6 that said no, and 1 said possibly. And I just wonder how we get round that trust issue, and because having young people from Southwark in the police who understand what it's like to be a kid in Southwark would be such a bridge towards that to bridge that gap between some of the kids and the officers, but it didn't seem in the room like there was any enthusiasm from those kids for doing this. How can we turn that round, and how can we show them that the police do a valuable job when they're so far from that place right now?
Can I just do a follow-on from that? I just wanted to ask a question regarding that, because a lot of the young people feel that they are either targeted when stopped and search, and obviously there's various reasons for that. But sometimes it goes to the point whereby how police deal with the young people when they stop them, how they interact, how they speak to them, that also kind of creates some kind of animosity between the two communities. And then again, with that question, how do we resolve that, and what is being done to resolve that?
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned before, around that stop and search piece, we put a lot of training into our new officers to make sure they understand stop and search. And again, I did a lot of work in a previous role a number of years ago around territorial, the TSGs, people will probably know them, and that they had a high level of complaints around stop and search. And again, it was that issue around, you can't leave an interaction without having had the last word. It's foreshortening the story. So it's basically making sure that people are far more aware of the interaction and how it counts. The body worn video, I think, is fantastic because it needs to be on for stop and search. And what we're putting in place locally is that they will do dip sampling of those stop and search as a supervisor to look at how their colleagues or their PCs are doing that stop and search element, and say, look, and then watch it back as if it's anything like a home video. You look back, well, did I really do that, and did I sound quite like that? And it's things like that. And I think it's very, very impactful. And that's probably the quickest way for them to learn to watch themselves back and have a little look. So I think that's one way of doing it. But the wider piece around how we can encourage people to join. I mean, don't get me wrong, that's a big barrier because it's not, I would suggest, it's not necessarily trendy for people to want to speak to the police. But a lot of the people, when you get them on a one-to-one basis or on a smaller group, are very positive around some of the things. But I think the biggest factor for us is getting those groups together so they can understand that when you stop me for this and how you speak to me like that. And then speaking of the officers in return going, well, look, when you're doing this and when you're doing that, this is why we speak to you and stop you, because of the way you're behaving in a certain area or with your friends, or as soon as you see us, you do something which raises our suspicion, because we're all creatures of habit and life experience, and they will have one thing around how the police deal with it and what they do, and they will react in a certain way because they've been dealt with before, and a police officer is exactly the same. But that educational piece, I think, is the key for us to make sure that people understand exactly how it feels and what it's like to be stopped and searched, and vice versa. If they came out and said, what do you think about this, they probably go, that one there, that one there, that one there. Well, why? Because I have those Jedi powers, and away they go. So we will do all we can to make sure that they're engaged in those things, and we come along to events, and we can probably do more about opening up police stations. But again, would the people we're trying to get into be attracted by those things? I doubt it very much. So it's again trying to find out what flicks their switch and what they're interested in, so that we can have a look at those mediums to get through, to make sure we can speak to the right people, rather than if we open up a police station for them to come and have a look at, it wouldn't be those people coming in to have a look.
Okay, we're going to move on to bonfire night, Michael.
Okay, thank you for coming. Listening to you and looking at the way you're actually moving your policing using IT and all the other interesting things to make you more efficient, I wonder if you are aware that the bonfire night and Halloween period, there's a great deal of disturbance that happens within that period. And I'm also wondering if you are aware that there are some gangs who are actually using that as an opportunity to actually create more mayhem in certain areas. And over the past 3 years or so, a particular area of Peckham, it looks like they are using very intelligent ways of communicating, mobile phone, it could be Snapchat, it could be BB, to organize themselves. and they basically come from different parts of the borough, and they all gather in a particular area, and they create massive disturbance. What I'm trying to find out from you is how, or are there any plans in place for your team to maybe be more proactive after a few years of them doing this on a regular basis, to be more proactive to stop them stop this from happening? Because once they're gone, they create serious damage in the communities that they come across, and they come in balaclava, you know, in some of the areas where it happens. In fact, when you come over there, it looks like a war zone. There are like 300-400, if you imagine 300-400 youth and 20 or 30 police officers trying to tackle 300 or 400 youth. It's just not possible.
In short, yes, we are looking at it. There was some intelligence that came in this morning from one of the estates, which we've sent some officers to have a look at and develop that intelligence this afternoon. There is a plan in place across the Met, so we obviously have one which is bespoke to Southwark under something which is called Operation Autumn Nights, which deals with this fortnight period across Halloween, bonfire night, etc. So what we've used is data from our own intelligence. We've looked at local authority data, casualty data, antisocial behaviour data to make sure that we've got people in the right place based on that level of intelligence. So we've got a number of assets out across that 2-week period to make sure that we have them in the right place as best we can. As you rightly point out, people who want to cause disturbance or come together and fire off fireworks, etc., will find ways around that, and it's for us to be as agile as we possibly can. With numbers around 400, etc., I would estimate that some phone calls will come in pretty quick around that, and we will be alerted to that. Now, the benefit we have is that we will have some pan-London resources floating around, not necessarily on this borough, but we can call in for assistance and backup. If you think back to the issues around Burgess Park in June, July last year, it was very much the same. And although the response teams here did very well, there was a need to call in some assistance from elsewhere, and that will be the tactic that we'll be using. Again, there have been other issues where we've used dispersal zone orders to good effect in dispersal zones, and that we can get in there and put that and advertise it. I think if you look on our Twitter feed again, we've advertised where we've put it of late. So there is a tactic around that, which we've made sure that the inspectors who are in charge for any given shift will be aware of that legislation and put it in place. We'll be proactive around that to make sure that there's a dispersal zone where we think there is going to be trouble, and make sure those officers are equipped with that information in order that they can deal with those individuals. If they keep coming back, then there's more power for us to deal with them and arrest them and things like that. So we use all those tools to make sure that we can be in the right place at the right time. But the issue around the communication that they're using around Snapchat and BB and all those other things, it limits what we can do, because we clearly won't be part of that group, won't be invited into that information, so we're always going to be catching up. And in order for us to do things around that, takes a considerable amount of paperwork and people extremely high in the organisation, if not further up, to give us opportunities to use strong legislation which is not designed for around surveillance and things like that. So to get into that, we're talking around levels of intrusion which are for major crimes, which people aren't going to give authority for fireworks and antisocial behaviour. It sounds harsh. I'm just trying to show you that if they're using that level of, as I mentioned, that IT issue, they're using quick means of communication and speaking at school or clubs and all that, we will meet up and then we'll come in and we'll come from this direction. Yes, on occasions we may have the intelligence, and where we do, we will be proactive around it and deal with those issues, but more often than not it will be reactive, and we will hear about it afterwards and now have to try and catch up. But we do have a plan for that 2-week period. The whole Met has a plan for that 2-week period. It is centrally monitored, and we have to give feedback on a daily basis as to what we've done. I think I've got some figures with me somewhere here. So if we're looking at some of the stuff over the last week, crime trends wise, they are down for the same period last year. Let's have a look. 26 arrests, 91 stop and search, 14 school patrols. We've get into a number of businesses to speak to them. We've done some test purchase sales around alcohol, fireworks. I think 35 test purchase operations, 5 of which have been positive in that they have been found to be, not doing what they should be doing. So we're doing all the preventative measures to get in there. And again, we will do the same in the lead up to New Year's Eve as well. We've got a licensing strategy around that to make sure we get into businesses, shops, licensed premises, to make sure that they are abiding by the law, and we will do all those sort of things. So what else have we had? Good work. The Joint Enforcement team did a weapon sweep, found a load of knives, some Class A drugs, 25 bags of cannabis, a moped and some number plates in some of their sweeps. So that's the sort of stuff we are doing on a daily basis to deal with this level of antisocial behaviour through this key period, and we will do the same in key periods across sort of the calendar year.
Sure. Okay. Over the past years, one of the things that the police have done, which has been very, very effective to actually reduce crime in some areas, is if particular things are happening in particular hotspots, one of the things they've done in the past is put what is like a mobile CCTV in advance of it taking place. So effectively, when the large groups are gathering, you can actually see them from your control room even before it becomes a big thing. Is this something that you can consider doing to actually make you more proactive in these areas?
Yeah, I think that's part of one of our action plans. I think we've asked, I don't know if the local authority's got a CCTV. I think we've asked if we can borrow that. Obviously, it doesn't belong to us. So we don't have one bespoke to Southwark Borough. Many years ago when I was here last time, we used to have one, but we don't anymore. But we will look at all those avenues, and I've spoken to some of our teams to see if we, again, in the longer term operations, if we can speak to some of our technical departments and put up cameras elsewhere to help us. But yes, we have explored that, and it's part of our tactical plan for the next 2 weeks.
Okay, so I only have one more topic from up here. If Chris thinks her question was answered before around technology. I'll come back to you in a sec. I've got VJ had something.
Can I just ask one question following from that?
Yeah, of course.
You used to use CCTV and you haven't got it anymore. My question's got to be why haven't you got it anymore? If it's proved that it works.
I think Lambeth have a CCTV and we've asked if we can borrow it, but clearly Lambeth will be using it. So not every borough has one, is what I'm trying to say. I think we used to have one, but it probably got old and defunct.
Right, so if it's an effective method, why hasn't someone got one?
I can ask, but we haven't.
So can we have one, please?
I haven't got any money to buy one, but I will ask. If you're willing to give me some money on the way out. If you're willing to do some collection on the way out, that'd be lovely.
So, before we get to BJ's question on the London Bridge attacks, I'm just going to look around and see if anyone has anything else they'd like to ask in this section. Still got 3 from the floor, I'm aware, and then we're going to wrap this section up because we are a little bit over time already. Please go
I
ahead.
do have about the IT.
And Chris does have a question on IT.
So do you want me to ask it now?
No, next.
I mean, now?
Yeah.
On
Go on.
Yeah. No, it's just that you said twice, you said that you just about know how to use a mobile phone. This isn't a criticism of you, because I'm in the same boat. And then you said that, the police as a whole have difficulty getting around Twitter and Facebook. So much now is about new technology. And so if you have that problem, you're professional people, how are the people sort of living on our estates who aren't young and born with a mobile phone in their mouth, how are they supposed to come in line with all these new initiatives? Because I wouldn't know, if I had a problem, I wouldn't know where to ring, I wouldn't know where to look on the website. And it just worries me that for a lot of people, there's a lot of fear out there, isn't there? There's a lot of fear between people's ears, whether it's they're fearful of going out because they hear about the night crime, they hear about everything else. But they're just, we need to have some forward planning. You're relying a lot, aren't you, on volunteer groups that are going to get out there. I mean, I know we had a situation in Nunhead, because that's where I live, and I'm involved with one voluntary group, and we had a lot of problems with children and antisocial behaviour. And the only way that people knew how to deal with it was because they came to us as a voluntary group, and then we had the means to look at what can we do to help. And when we did what we did to help, the police were really very, very helpful. But I don't know how you get that information out to people generally about this is what you need to do if you're a victim of crime. Because I don't think people know where to go anymore.
Well, I suppose the issue around that is for us to engage with people and organisations like yourself, because there will be a corporate response to that. And
there's not many of you around, is there, to be able to do that?
But we'll have to find a way around it, won't we? In that we'll have to make time and find ways around the issue, around sensible meetings and things like that.
Yeah, because we had just recently I had a an event that was for elderly people. We do a Christian Time panel, and I asked if the police would come down because the elderly had actually asked for that, and it was the wrong day to ask because the person who would have come actually had to go to another meeting, so they couldn't come. And I understand your resources are so limited, and it sounds quite petty, and I'm asking for luxury items, if you like. But how do you reach people if your resources are so low that you can't actually answer the questions that people need to know, that are making them stay indoors because they're fine going outside?
Okay, I mean, again, that's for us to work out as we go forward around, DWIs being where they should be, having their sort of meetings as they should have, and again, it's for us to work out to get those communications out. I mean, a good example of Nunhead is one, East Dulwich is another, where there's concerns of a similar nature down in sort of East Dulwich, where they feel that they haven't got, or their community down there hasn't got the IT skills to deal with where the world is going. I mean, when you're looking at what the Met is trying to do, and you compare it to something like banking, for example, I think the vast majority of interactions with the bank these days are via IT. And as we go through that, people will get more used to this. So the research that the Met did around the groups of 60, 70, 80-year-olds was very positive around the use of IT. But clearly it's not going to be for everybody. So I understand where you're coming from, and it's for us to make sure through our ward officers and through our communications that we get to as many people as physically possible.
Can I just say one other thing? That it's going back a bit, that it's about when you're talking about how to reach the young people. In the 80s, I used to work in a local youth club, and the same things were being said in the 80s that are being said now. And the children that were involved then are now the parents of the children. And so it seems to me that you need to go one step back and actually be trying to engage families.
Totally agree. I mean, we're doing a lot of work around that, and some of the stuff I've done previously, you tend to find three different types of families. Those who are totally unaware and appalled and shocked that their little angel was involved in knife crime and gang work. Those who have, in essence, lost control because a lot of these individuals will be, boys in men's bodies and things like that. And so you find people who feel fairly helpless and need a bit of love and support. And you've got a third type who have just given up and aren't interested. And it's that is the general spectrum that we have and what we're trying to do with that. That is why it is a partnership response rather than an immediate police response, because there are other means and avenues that support can come in through local authorities and other areas to get into those. But I totally agree. And again, we're doing a lot of work with parents when we call them in to assist with interviews around some of their, the youngsters that have come in, and they are shocked and appalled. And when the mum comes in, the chap who's been effing and blinding in one of the cells dissolves into tears because his mum's turned up. And that is it's almost like flicking a switch. So we are trying to do as much work as we possibly can with families and parents to support them and educate them. And as I said, sending out letters saying, look, these are the links, please have a look, please have a check for children, for that very, very purpose.
BJ?
So just a question about, just following up on the horrific events of June this year. It's a question in two parts, if I may. So one, obviously, in the days after the incident, there would have been huge numbers of officers out on the street. I know leave was cancelled, etc. I just wanted to understand, have the Home Office made good on the funding, the additional funding that would have been required to maintain that level of operation in the borough? And secondly, I know that a great many officers from across the borough were involved in the response on the night. I know one of the Chaucer ward officers was involved in the response on the night, for which I'm very grateful. I'm interested to know, have all officers who have required it, have they had access to the help and support that they needed after the incident?
Okay, I'll deal with the first bit first, I suppose, around the funding. Obviously that's dealt with centrally, so I can't give you the answer as to whether, but yes, a great deal of money was spent on obviously policing the events and the aftermath of that. On the second bit around occupational health and support, yes, we had, I'm trying to think now, we had turn up within the first 5 minutes. We had 2 response teams on. A lot of naval officers turned up because they were on aid somewhere else over in sort of the east of the borough. We had a lot of CRD officers turn up, so we probably had well over 100 turn up. There are some damaged individuals, and I say damaged in the nicest sense, in that there are some people who are suffering considerably. On the night, we sent a vehicle to go and pick up the head of OH and bring them in. They lived relatively locally, so we sent someone in, so they immediately, as they came in, we took them to Southwark Police Station in order they could get their blood-soaked uniforms off and get all that sorted, then took them back in numbers back to Peckham so we could have an immediate debrief with the key teams. We had occupational health there immediately to speak to them, and then they had a breakout room for self-referral if they wanted to come and sit down, or the supervisors felt they needed immediate support. They had that immediately. We've done an awful lot of work with all the teams, especially in the aftermath. I had a meeting with a couple of supervisors today around one young lady who's clearly very affected by the events. As you'd expect, it affects different people in different ways. One of the good sergeants from Peckham did a lot of life support on one individual. His trousers were literally wringing wet with blood, and you can tell just by looking at him, the days afterwards was, it just wasn't him. And, working with these individuals, you get to know their personalities and how they act. And there were some people who were very, very touched by what happened. But we put an awful lot of work in as an organisation because of Westminster, London Bridge, Manchester, Grenfell Tower, etc. So we had a number of officers who dealt with London Bridge who responded to Grenfell Tower, and that's just the nature of what we do. In that we are a 24/7 emergency service. The fire brigade will be exactly the same. So, and it's not just those events. We had issues in Peckham when we had a murder in Peckham where the fire brigade turned up and we had open heart massage and all sorts of stuff with police officers. So it's not just the big things. And what we try to put in place is that we will try, and we've advocated some best practice to the organisation which they're looking at and probably will take up. It's not if they're here and now. It's not the 6 months or the 12 months later. It's something which may happen. I think if you look at some of the military research, it seems like 25 years later it starts to affect people. So what we're advocating is there is a marker put on the officer's occupational health record that if something happens in the future, this flags itself up to make sure they're looked after. But please be assured that we have put an awful lot of love, support and attention and continue to do so. Chief Inspector, a bloke called Pete McGarry, who works with me, has been absolutely fantastic. He was a Chief Inspector at Croydon after the tram disaster. I brought a lot of good practice from that, dealing with the officers there. He did exactly the same for me here, and I think it's gone down extremely well. But the key issue for us is that they all look after each other, and what we basically said to them is if you think someone needs a bit of love and you see a difference in them, you must flag it up immediately, which is what we've done. And again, there are a number of people. Charlie was the chap who was off duty, still not back to work quite yet. And again, it's looking at the wider thing, because his sister took it very badly, his family took it very badly as you'd expect, and again, it's about reaching out to those individuals as well, and it's one of those domino effects about how far can we reach out to make sure that we're looking after all the right people at the right time. But again, it's just trying to find those specific strands around what they need. So there has been lots of stuff from the military we've tried to use, lots of things we've taken from the transport police and everything else. So, and again, the fire brigade have done an awful lot around Grenfell Tower, which is fairly similar to what we've done. So please be assured that we have made sure that everybody is well and truly looked after.
Thanks, Simon. So I had 3 questions from the floor. I'm just going to ask you. So you said yours was general.
Yeah, it's something to do with when you said the figure at the start that everything's up. Various crimes are up with less resources, so the arrest must be down. You've got less resources.
I don't think the arrest is down, if I'm brutally honest. Some of the
if you've got less police.
No, not necessarily.
So why? How do they start?
Well, the arrests?
Yeah.
Because they're busy. And they may come down in the future, and the reason I'll explain the arrests might come down in the future is because of the way we're changing how investigations are dealt with, but that will take a while, depends on how long the chair wants me to talk about that, or we can talk about it afterwards if you wish. But some of the way we're dealing with investigations in the future, in that we're giving them back to our frontline officers rather than handing it over to the CID straight away, will probably stem that. And there are other things that the in around screening of crime. So not all crime will get screened in for investigation, and there will be some honest conversations with victims of crime to say, look, we've had a look at this, and if we're brutally honest, there are no investigative leads, so it will go no further than this. Whereas previously, it probably has gone in for a secondary investigation and has dragged on a little bit, so that has increased the volumes. But we can have a chat about that afterwards.
You've recently brought in a thing where under £50 shoplifting stuff you don't look at anymore.
That's exactly what I'm talking about, that screening policy.
So that's still crime, and it's not counted as you going to it.
Yeah, so that's why I think the arrests will start to come down. And I think it's been in the papers, hasn't it, of late? I think
Well, yeah, that's right.
The DAC was in the Sun or something talking about that screening policy. So yes, I think over the future, those numbers will start to come down.
So at some stage, where they keep on doing cuts as they have for the last few years, you'll find a losing battle, aren't you?
I wouldn't necessarily say that. If it was easy, it wouldn't be fun. So I don't think we're going to. It's not. I don't think necessarily a losing battle. I mean, we could argue that, but I don't think it's a losing battle. I think the issues are with more concentrated effort around some crime types. I think it will increase it because we'll get the right people. And if you look at the research, it's the minority that cause the crime. So if you can get into those, the rest of it should come down.
Okay, thank you. And I'm just going to check, because if these are very specific things, then maybe Simon would be happy to take them when we break for 5 minutes so you can talk to him individually. But is yours a specific issue?
Can I just put my one up?
Yeah, wait, so if it's a specific issue, and I know Carol's is because I spoke to her before, so we're going to break now for 5 minutes because we're running very late, and you will have the opportunity to talk directly to the Borough Commander during that break. Does that make sense? Because it's on camera as well. I think that's a very reasonable thing. I think that there's no need for us to get into specifics in a public setting when you can talk directly to the Borough Commander during the break. So I'm going to break there and come back in 5 minutes. Thank you.